The premise of this video is simple. Let's discuss to what extent each of the 14 princes is likely to be beyond Netero's progeny, by placing them in one of 4 categories. Namely, definitely not, probably not, possibly, and most likely. While we really don't have enough info to go on for me to definitively claim that a particular prince is without a doubt a child of Beyond's, I'm confident in asserting that at least a handful are not. Hence why there's no "a definitely is" category to mirror the definitely not. With that said, let's get into it. Let's begin with those princes in the definitely not category, and very appropriately open this list with none other than first Prince Benjamin. It makes no sense for the first prince to be anyone else's child but that of King Nasubi, considering how he is the king's firstborn, together with the fact that Benjamin seems to be in his mid-30s at the very least. It's even possible that little Benji was sired while Nasubi himself was still a prince, and was then legally recognized as his heir following Nasubi's victory. Which, by the way, would mirror exactly what Benjamin is aiming to do currently in the story as of chapter 410. It's like poetry, it rhymes. To sum it up, due to his firstborn status and age, Benjamin is definitely not a child of Beyond's. Moving on. Next on the definitely not list is third prince Zheng Lei. Apart from being one of the eldest princes and thus slightly less likely to be a child of Beyond's, it's also quite possible that we already know who his father is. Namely, the boss of the Jiyu mafia family, Onior Longbao. This is basically officially confirmed in my mind because of Zhang's line after leaving Onior's quarters, in which he thinks, "I'm counting on you, father," while Onior is framed just behind him. That's not the only reason, of course, and there's a lot of supporting evidence which adds to the credence of that line indeed referring to Onior. While the two were speaking to each other, whenever Onior referenced King Nasubi, he always referred to him as "my brother" and not "your father." Onior refers to himself as a second-rate nobody, yet he treats Zhang as if he's equal to him in status. He never gets up to show respect, never offers him a drink or anything of the sort, and Zhang isn't bothered by any of that despite basic cordiality being important to him. In the context in which it was stated, it makes no sense for Zhang to be counting on King Nasubi at that moment. The king will not disclose any information so as to not influence the succession war, meaning that Onior would need to find out how his half-brother won in an indirect way, by asking those that were around at the time of Nasubi's succession war. As such, the only father Zhang could be counting on is Onior. In a very similar vein, 7th Prince Luzurus also cannot be a progeny of Beyond's. Chances are more than likely that his father is the head of the Shar family, Broccoli. This connection is admittedly more tentative than Zhang's and Onior's, but it does have 2 decent arguments going for it. Broco and Luzurus look reasonably alike, and curly hair is a dominant gene trait. And B, we have a precedent of a princely son supporting his mafia boss father, with Zhang and Onior, which gives credence to Luzurus having decided to support his own father once he possibly learned the truth behind their relation. As I said, it's really not ironclad, but I feel confident putting him in this category as well. The last 2 princes I'm putting on the definitely not list are 8th Prince Salesale and 12th Prince Momose. This primarily due to the fact that we really don't know much about them on account of them having already been assassinated. Plus, it really wouldn't be narratively interesting or satisfying in any way. It's primarily a meta-argument instead of an in-world one. Though if you aren't satisfied with this and would like an in-world explanation, there's a strong argument to be made for Beyond wanting to see to it that his investment was well protected, and them having dropped out so early goes against this idea. I'll expand on this notion later on with some of the other princes. Those were the 5 out of 14 princes in the definitely not category. Let's now move on to the probably nots, i.e. those princes whose father's identity I cannot definitively claim to know, but heavily suspect it's not beyond. Let's kick things off with 5th Prince Tubeppa. We know very little about her, and despite being one of the elder princes, she has by far the least amount of power and influence among them, having prepared the least for the succession war. While, on the other hand, her 4 elder siblings either have a personal army or a mafia family backing them. Being in such a disadvantageous position is a decent argument against her being Beyond's daughter, since, as I've said, I'm confident Beyond would take steps to protect his investment. This, paired with another reason that I'll get into when I discuss 4th Prince Terror Sandwich later on, makes me think Tubeppa is very unlikely to be a child of Beyond's. Next in this category is 6th Prince Tyson, who is here for basically the exact same reason as Tubeppa. We don't know a lot about her, and she barely has any real influence or power whatsoever. For what it's worth, I'd put her at the very top of the probably not category, since she seems like an excellent dark horse candidate, i.e. the prince you'd genuinely never suspect to be in any relation with Beyond. The last prince I'm putting in this category is 10th Prince Cacho. Again, for basically the same reason as with Tubeppa and Tyson, along with the fact that she has already died. However, since she is in a way still alive as a manifestation of her own guardian spirit beast, and will remain manifest as long as 11th Prince Fugetsu remains alive, or at least until the succession war lasts, I'm not counting her deceased status against her narrative odds of being Beyond's child to the same degree as I did for Sale Sale and Momose. As you'll notice, I am indeed classifying her separately from Fugetsu, the reason for which I'll make clear as soon as we get to her. For what it's worth, I'd put Cacho at the very bottom of this category. Now we move on to the possiblies. Both the princes in this and the following category are ones whom I believe have a realistic chance of being a progeny of Beyond Neteros. It's just that I believe those in this category as being less likely than those in the following one. With that said, I'd like to open this category with a prince most of you probably didn't expect to rank this high. 2nd Prince Camilla. Yup. Listen, I think people are massively overlooking her in this regard. Sure, she's the 2nd oldest among the princes, therefore significantly lowering her chances of being Beyond's daughter. But A. Camilla's extremely well prepared for the succession war, being outdone solely by Big Bro Benji. But, then again, she is the 2nd oldest and has had more than enough time, opportunity and resources to prepare herself. By itself, her level of prep isn't much of an indicator of anything. However, B. Her have-nots all utilize curses, which is the same broad type of Nen abilities Beyond has been alleged to be highly proficient in. I say alleged because we only have Longy's second-hand info that Beyond personally plays the curses on her and the other powerful curse sacrifices when it could have also been a colleague or an imbued object. Nonetheless, the connection, while not being the most specific, is there, since each of the powerful curse sacrifices is supposedly meant to curse a specific prince to death. When certain conditions are met, it's possible Camilla's have-nots could tie into those conditions in some way. In my video on Camilla, I joked about how who could have possibly taught Camilla such a certifiably insane and inherently dangerous Hatsu as Cat's name. But one of the very few people with the intimate knowledge of Nen mechanics, boldness, and general mental unhingedness to teach such an ability to a high-ranking prince would be Beyond, if not one of his high-ranking subordinates at his request. Think about it, this ability basically guarantees that Camilla won't be taken out easily, on the account that she's a pain in the butt to put down permanently, unless you know what you're doing. If only she could stop herself from being an unhinged, egomaniacal lunatic. From the second, we go a ways down to get to 9th Prince Helkenberg. As you're all aware, Helk is actually the son of first Queen Unma, who transferred her son to second Queen Duazul in order to change his order in the succession hierarchy and relieve some of the pressure that comes from being a child of the first queen. Now, as I'll explain a bit later, I don't believe this would have been the first time Unma would have done this kind of child exchange with Duazul, but we'll get to that in a bit. What could have been a reason for this swap is Unma's desire to keep a child sired by Beyond as safe as possible before the beginning of the succession war, believing that Beyond would perhaps aid him when the time came. Since that never happened though, this is a point against Helk indeed being Beyond's son. All that he has accomplished thus far is owing to his own intelligence, cunning, and force of will to punch above his weight class. He has not only managed to stay alive, more or less, despite being the target of the first prince, he was even able to land a potentially lethal blow on this best prepared of the 14 princes. The only way I can see Beyond somehow influencing things from behind the scenes is by having instructed or manipulated a select number of Black Whale personnel into standing with and supporting Helk, which would explain how he was able to find supporters loyal enough to manifest his arrow even on the second tier on relatively short notice. Though this is admittedly a bit of a stretch, and it's far more likely that Helk finding those supporters was owing to his candid character and charisma, rather than Beyond's outside influence. The issue is that due to the amount of prep time he's had, this whole ordeal began when Botobai was still a kid, and considering the lengths he is willing to go to make his ambitions a reality, dude was then attacking literal babies, nothing is beyond With that said though, I'd put Helk near the bottom of the possible category. Next on the list we have 11th Prince Fugetsu. First, allow me to explain why she's here while Kacho's down in the probably not category. Put simply, I think there's a very strong possibility that they are not twins at all. Not only are their personalities very different, but Kacho and Fugetsu look nothing alike. Furthermore, while Kacho resembles their mother 6th Queen Seiko, Fugetsu resembles neither her nor King Nasubi in any meaningful way. She also doesn't meaningfully resemble Beyond, to be fair, but there's one big thing she has going for her: inexplicable protection. She is actively being looked after and kept safe by the Ministry of Justice's Deputy Chief Prosecutor, Kaiser. Kaiser is a prevailing enigma, and I've spoken to a lot of theories regarding his motivation and allegiances. Everything from him being a sleeper agent of Morena's, to him being a relative of Fugetsu's, to him being an agent of Beyond's. If that last one is true, that would be a good explanation for why he was going out of his way to such an extent to keep Fugetsu safe, despite risking the neutrality of the Justice Bureau as well as his very life. I actually initially put her higher in the most likely category, but decided to knock her down to the very top of the possibly list due to Kaiser's thus far much contested allegiance. The fourth and final prince in the possibly category is one you may have expected to be reasonably higher, namely 14th Prince Wobble. When I first read chapter 401, I immediately thought of Wobble as being one of the 3 or 4 potential contenders for being Beyond's secret child among the princes. But after having time to think on it, I don't believe it's as likely as I initially believed it to be. There are 4 reasons why. A. Wobble is way too young to be of any use to Beyond anytime soon, and what he'd need is someone who would continue to support him in his endeavor on the Dark Continent. B. She has no protection or resources. Literally the only reason Wobble and Oito have survived until now is due to Kurapika's efforts, and Kurapika's involvement, and especially his employee under Queen Oito, is something Beyond couldn't have predicted or orchestrated. C. Queen Oito has no incentive to lie to Kurapika, and she's convinced that Wobble's father is King Nasubi. While there's always the possibility that her memory was altered, that kind of Nen attack usually leaves the victim at least least partially awakened to Nen, which is something Kurapika and Bill never noticed or noted. And D, if Longy believed there was a possibility Wobble was an offspring of Beyonds, and expressed to Kurapika, Bill, and Queen Oito her desire to kill that offspring, Longy's an idiot. As such, Occam's razor says that Wobble is more likely to be Nasubi's rather than Beyond's daughter. I'd actually put her at the very bottom of the possibly category. Finally, we move on to the most likelies, i.e. those princes who are, well, most likely candidates for being Beyond's progeny. Let's start with the most obvious candidate, 4th Prince Terror Sandwich. Terror has two obvious things going for him in this regard, as I'm sure you're aware. A, he's a Nen genius on par with, if not even above, the likes of Gon and Killua. While this doesn't necessarily point to him being a descendant of Beyonds, keep in mind that both Longy and Salkov are confirmed to be Beyond's children, and neither are anywhere near close to Terror's level of talent. If anyone was going to surpass Gon and Killua in talent and potential, it would have to be the descendant of Isaac freaking Netero. And B, he just very much looks like a young Isaac Netero. The eyes, the hair, the stubble, it's mostly all there. All he's really missing to be a picture-perfect copy like Beyond is the distinctive, more prominent hooked nose. But that's it. Considering Togashi's inconsistent art style, I could easily see Netero looking like this in a flashback of him in his 20s. With that said, there's an additional third argument I have, which makes him even more likely to be Beyond's son. The thing which I alluded to earlier when I spoke about 5th Prince to Beppa. I believe that the 1st and 2nd queens, most likely at the behest of the 1st queen, swapped out their children at birth, with Terror going to 1st Queen Unma and to Beppa going to 2nd Queen Duazol. If Beyond chose to sire a child with the 2nd Queen, and can you blame him, and the 1st Queen found out, owing to the fact that she has the best information network among the queens, she may have decided to take the child for herself. Not only as some kind of power move, but to increase her chances of being the mother of a winning prince. This idea came about in my mind due to the recent revelation that Hulk was indeed Unma's child, which was something I had suspected for a long time, just based on his resemblances to both her and Benjamin. Going by the same logic of family resemblances, to Beppa's rugged features remind me much more of Unma, Benji, and Hulk, while Terror's elegance, style, and attractiveness bring to mind Duazol and Camilla. To bring this theory home, Terror and Beppa were born consecutively, and we do not know their respective ages, making this arrangement quite feasible from a technical and in-world standpoint. Last, and almost least, we have 13th Prince Mariam. While not as blatant as Terror, Mariam is the other obvious choice for being Beyond's secret child. And this is something I referenced in the video analyzing 12th Prince Momose, their mother, 7th Queen Sevanti, very heavily favored Mariam, to the degree that it cost her older daughter her life. In another setting, I would have said the favoritism was gender-based, but for all their faults, Kakin's pretty egalitarian in this regard, giving equal rights to both sexes to inherit the throne. As such, this favoritism must stem from something else, and I believe there's a strong possibility it's due to Mariam's father being Beyond. Using the same argument as before with Unma poaching Terror, a queen that knew Beyond was the father to her child would understand that it had much greater chances of surviving and becoming king just based on that simple fact. Hell, considering the queens were almost certainly aware of Beyond's true power, influence, and reputation, in their minds this would practically be a guarantee. While Sevanti was saddened and brought to tears when Momose was killed, she also got over it relatively quickly, at least on the surface. In other words, she did love Momose, but focused all her efforts, love, and hopes on Mariam after he was born, knowing that he had the far greater chances of not only becoming king, but ultimately surviving. As such, she may have made the practical decision to prioritize the safety of one child rather than risk losing both. B. He is the right age where he could be easily influenced and instructed by his mother on what to do were he to become king, meaning that Beyond, as her baby daddy, would effectively be in control of the Kakin Empire. C. This is something that's not my idea, but was something a regular commenter that goes by Kander Udon, not sure whether it's supposed to be German or English, sorry, brought up 3 months ago on the Chapter 401 review. Mariam's GSB has the perfect ability to keep the young prince, who is without sufficient military power, safe and alive. Remember that King Nasubi apparently won his own succession battle by effectively camping. While GSBs are shaped by a prince's character and personality, and their abilities therefore cannot be influenced directly, considering Beyond's level of pedantic planning, it's quite possible he found a way to influence a GSB's potential ability. By instructing Mariam's mother to act in a certain way and shape his character, together with some Nen nonsense, I wouldn't be surprised if he was able to influence the young boy in just such a way where he'd develop a GSB with a specific kind of defensive ability. This is admittedly a bit of a stretch, since I think it's more probable the GSB developed such an ability following Momose's death, feeding off of Mariam's negative thoughts and a desire to be shielded off from the outside world in his own little safe space, but the idea is interesting enough where it absolutely deserves consideration. With that said, I'd put Mariam right below Terror with regards to how likely he is to be a child of Beyond's. Now, before we bring this video to a close, there are two very important notions we must consider. First, who says Beyond only sired a single child among the princes? Knowing him, as soon as he realized Kakin the king was basically enshrined in Kakin's constitution, he would have absolutely made sure to maximize his chances. There's absolutely no reason why he'd stop at a single child. And considering the amount of aforementioned prep time, influence, and power, both literal and metaphorical, he holds, I wouldn't be surprised if there were as many as 2, 3, or even 4 of his children among the princes. This list was made under the premise of only a single prince being the likely offspring of Beyond's. If we're allowing for as many as 3 or 4 candidates, I would, very tentatively, add a definitely is category in that case, which would change the arrangement of the princes in the following way based on the information currently available as of Chapter 410. On the other hand, there's something else we should seriously consider as well. There's also the possibility that none of them are Beyond's progeny. This whole plot point was introduced by Longi, and her story is far from ironclad. What if the powerful curse sacrifices were actually meant to be used on the Dark Continent, rather than on a prince, and Longi simply made the wrong deduction, not knowing the full scope of Beyond's plans? Why were the parents of Makaha, Longi's stepsister through Beyond and fellow powerful curse sacrifice, not dejected at her not being accepted as a part of Camilla's personal guard, despite it apparently being rather important for Beyond's plans? What's the relation and connection between the weak and powerful curse sacrifices? Do they all have the same roles to fill? And if so, is it by design, or are the weak curse sacrifices simply those ones that failed to properly mature, let's call it? Now, this plot point being a red herring is rather unlikely, of course. It would be a bit disappointing from a storytelling perspective, plus from an in-world perspective, I'm sure that Kurapika would have picked up on any inconsistencies if Longi's theory was meant to be portrayed as dubious. As such, while not very likely, we should at least keep the possibility that Beyond doesn't have an offspring among the princes in the back of our minds going forward. And that's that. Who do you think is the likeliest contender for being Beyond's progeny among the princes? Feel free to leave your own lists down below. I'll also leave a link to the one I used on Tier Maker, I just adapted it a bit. As always, thank you very much for watching, your feedback is always appreciated, subscribe if you'd like more content like this. I'd like to once again thank Amaswamy and Matt B for going the extra mile in supporting the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.